It should be live now because it says streaming on Facebook.
Okay.
Yes. Find out if that is a true thing. Hey, there we are.
Yes, it is.
All right, good morning, or good afternoon, rather. Welcome to
There you
2 on 1, the highest rated chat show between two disciples ministers as they interview another clergy person about pop culture, theology, and its intersections. My name is Arthur Stewart. I am one of your co-hosts. Joining me today, as she shares on Facebook Live, is
hi, friends.
Stephanie Kendall as well.
That's me.
And our guest today is Charles Anthony Bryant. Would you care to introduce yourself, sir?
Good morning. My name is Charles Anthony Bryant. I say good morning randomly. Steph can tell you this. Good morning. My name is Charles Anthony Bryant. I am a working musician in the city of New York. I am music leader at Park Avenue Christian Church. I am also the director of choral activities at First Corinthian Baptist Church. And I do a whole lot of singing and music things for various people around the city and around the country. And when I'm able to, around the world. But, you know, we're Americans, so we're kind of trapped right now. Yay.
Here we are.
Here we
So we're
are.
back together talking about the Umbrella Academy. Do note we'll be talking about the first and second seasons of the Umbrella Academy today. So you are warned at this point that spoilers abound. If you haven't seen it, you can find it on Netflix. It's included with a subscription. It's marvelous. It stars all sorts of people and Ellen Page, who ruins everything.
I like Ellen Page. I'm going
I
to
do
stand
too.
up for her.
She's
Okay.
great.
Well,
Okay.
dude, watch out for her enormous forehead.
We are not going to body shame here.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. That's
We're going to love all of our gifts for all of the gifts that they are.
okay.
Wait, oh,
Speaking
a forehead
of
is
gifts.
a gift. Wait, a forehead is a gift. Can we linger there just for a minute? Just,
Sure. A forehead is a gift.
Is it? Okay.
All right, so
Separates.
the Umbrella Academy, for those of you that are uninitiated in it, it started as a comic book with, was it Dark Horse or Image? I never remember which.
Dark Horse.
Dark Horse. It's about 7 children who were all born as part of an event and were basically kind of bought, borrowed, taken in by a rich, kind of crazy man. So we get this X-Men vibe. Turns out the rich man, Reginald Hargreaves, is an alien, but whatever. We'll talk about that another time. All of these children show superpowers except for Vanya, but we'll talk about that as we go on. And it's really about what happens when they become adults. And there's a lot of themes in a variety of ways. I'm going to lock this meeting while we're talking. Now we're stuck together for real.
Forever.
I guess, is that a fair enough summation? Is there anything you'd add, Charles?
So he bought them.
He bought them.
He bought them. He bought each of the children. I believe as it goes, there were 43 children born in the world on that day, but there was some other type of event that happened on that day as well. But these are the ones that were earmarked and that he bought. All of them display, we're talking season 1, early season 1. So all of them display these talents from childhood with the exception of Vanya. I happen to know the pronunciation of that because I spent a very little bit of time over in Russia in St. Petersburg. But all of them have these talents, and then later on we find out that Vanya has some talents. But that is a really good summation so far.
So I want to talk about talent. I'm gonna move us into, I guess, our first question, especially as we're talking about Vanya, since we don't. Since apparently, probably Arthur doesn't want to spend a lot of time on Ellen Page.
No,
but,
I don't mind. I don't mind at all. I just. Like,
so Vanya, what?
She was horrible in Tales from the City. Anyways, sorry.
Okay. Anyway, but so here's my question is, we've got all these gifts, right? And so all these kids have a part of it. And Vanya is led to think for years of her life that she doesn't have a gift. And it manifests itself in a really unhealthy, really problematic, really destructive way. And so as people of faith who talk about spiritual gifts a lot, what does that have to tell us about nurturing the gifts of our children as part of the larger worshiping body, so that these gifts are nurtured in a way that they can not only control and share, but do so without destruction?
Is the question to me, or is this a conversation?
It's open, yeah. Oh, open
Okay,
conversation.
cool. I would say first thing, Vanya's gift is it is hidden from her and it is hidden from everyone because Sir Reginald, who is their father, is afraid.
Mm.
He is fearful of which is interesting because to me that speaks to foresight. It also speaks to something that you know that you are just not telling everyone. And so you have foresight around your child or this child that you have purchased, which is a completely different conversation that could be either positive or negative, but mostly negative. But you have this foresight, and then rather than try to teach her how to control or cultivate the gift, you teach her that she has none at all. Now, this is interesting for me because there's a saying that oftentimes we in church, we have our gifts, but we don't hone them. Mm. And I think that there's an issue there with Vanya because had she been able to hone the gift earlier, or had her parent not been so fearful of the gift, then she would have been able to perhaps control it better so that we don't see all of the things happening later on that we do see. This relates for me to our spiritual walks in that a lot of times we have children who display either our gifts in a magnified way, and we know the pain that we have experienced coming up with certain gifts and people didn't understand us, and then we try to stifle those gifts, or they have gifts that are completely separate from ours that we don't seek to learn anything about when God has given it to our hand to raise this particular child.
So, okay, no, please continue.
So, and I speak of this in the context for me of Pentecostalism, in the context of the charismatic church, in the context of the Black church, in the context of, these are my wheelhouses. These are the spaces in which I have moved heavily. Oftentimes you see highly gifted people, and then they are told things like, well, you be humble. Your gift will make room for you. Now, wait, be humble and my gift will make room for me. That doesn't really work out. But a lot of that is coming from be humble. People don't necessarily need to see you. People don't necessarily need to know that you can do what you do. But there's this magical thought that one day you will wake up and the gift will be fully perfected. And you will just be able to function and do all these things. And that's not the way that is. If we are not taught to
blow up the moon.
Mm-hmm. Well, that, or worse yet, well, you can blow up the moon or you can blow up yourself. Because if you are not taught how to manage the gift, if you are not taught how to cultivate, hone, and then care for the gift, and if you are not taught also, we see a lot of times that people grow up knowing that they are gifted, but they don't recognize that other people are. And so you end up blowing up yourself as opposed to,
and that comes back at, in season 2 when we find that the handler's daughter, I'm going to forget her name, but that she's one of them, right? That we forget that, the very first thing we learn about this entire series through the narration is that there's, 43 of these children, however many there are, right? And yet here we are with these 7. And we, and so then why are we caught off guard that there's an 8 or, or a 41st or whatever as they come together.
And with the handler's daughter too, that was big for me because the fact that her gift was that she could mimic or emulate anyone else's gift. Yo, really? Okay, go ahead.
Well, and I think within that too, we should talk about Harold Jenkins for a moment. If we can, Mr. Manipulator from season 1. Speaking of gifts and inclusion, Charles, I bring this up every week because I've been working on it for months. I'm doing a deep study on 1 Corinthians. I'm in chapter 12, which is kind of nice because what we miss in chapter 12 is when Paul starts talking about gifts, he talks about pneumatikoi. He's like, you spiritual people, it's spiritual gifts. But he's talking to specific folks who say they have great knowledge and they have great wisdom and they're probably talking in tongues. And Paul's like, cool. You can talk in tongues. You can be wise. You can do healings and miracles. This is like his gift list. And it's like, can talk in tongues or interpret tongues, whatever. I don't care, which I wish we paid more attention to. But as we're talking about everyone having a gift in this, what do we do if there's this? I think a lot about people who are called to parish ministry who are terrible preachers. And I know plenty of them because they're not going to go up and give a Fred Craddock style sermon, but instead work 20 hours on something that might fall flat or might just be the faithful proclamation of the gospel. It's not entertaining or infotaining or anything else. I don't identify with Harold Jenkins, but when he was laughed away by the Umbrella Academy because he desperately sought to use whatever gifts he had, essentially, when we talk about, be humble and hide yourself and you'll grow into it or anything else, what does it mean to cultivate people who clearly don't have the right gifts for it? What does it mean to have a music ministry? This is the perfect thing. You got tone deaf people who want to be in the choir. What do we do with that?
You're putting me on the spot.
I'm sorry.
No. It's,
and we can talk like
well, I think, yeah, it's hypothetical. And I think that so part of what we learn is, or what I think communities make us look at and why community is important is because it names the necessity of those without of the community, right? So those without gifts, let's call them like the superhuman gifts that we're talking about right now, allow you to know who does have a gift. Yeah. So they play a part in that responsibility of community, of holding each other accountable to use our gifts well. Because if you don't have a superhuman gift that can save the world, then what you need to do is remind those that have that gift to use them and to use them appropriately.
Well, I think there's that too, that we put so much weight on specific gifts.
Yeah.
So if you can, if you have the superhuman gift, you are seen as more valuable to the community. As opposed to, we should all be seeking to cultivate whatever gift we have. And if we cultivate it, again, hone it as opposed to just have it, not just those who are, gifted from birth, but there are some people, I know of people who have grown, let's talk music. I know of people who started out not singing well at all. I know of people who I went to conservatory with, who I asked the question, I hope none of them are watching right now, who I asked the question, well, how did you get here? Okay. Yet some of those people are singing circles around others now because they were given the time to cultivate the gift. If you are given time to sit with what you have, however little it may be, little becomes much to the touch of the master's hand. That's what, we've said for years. Do we really believe it? I don't often think we do, because in order to sustain the community in a certain way and in a certain light, oftentimes we only go for those individuals who are apparent. The gift is apparent. The gift, as opposed to really doing the work of ministry and working with some people who,
So then in that regard of, showing your gifts, honing them in that way, what do we say then to Klaus, who's part of his own gift is the ability, no one would know he had a gift if he didn't want them to, right? And he because we only know his gift of talking to the dead through the identity of Ben being there, right? That's how. So he could keep that to himself. He could not hone that, and he didn't hone it for years, right? That's how this whole thing has kind of gotten the best of him in these ebbs and flow of Klaus being Klaus. We're gonna call it a Klaus. And so I wonder about, embracing our own flawed understanding of our relationship to our gifts and the humility that is necessary to make room for others' gifts to shine. Does that make sense in the context of what we're trying to do? So we're trying to build church, we're trying to build community, right? Or like a faith community, whatever that looks like for your own context. Reginald Hargreaves is trying to build a superhuman academy. There's vision there, regardless of its ethics, right?
Can we talk real quick about the language of academy?
Sure.
So I he's not trying to build an academy.
Mm.
Because academy, I had a professor in undergrad. I went to Morehouse, and this particular professor, he was director of the Glee Club, Dr. David E. Morrow. Dr. Morrow used to tell us, he said, school is the place where you are allowed to be wrong. It is expected that in school you are wrong, so that when you are a professional in school, you will have learned everything that you should have learned. The academy, you will have learned everything you should have learned, so that you can then stand up and deliver. I think certainly in the Umbrella Academy, this is not an academy. They are learning on the job. That's not learning. I don't see that as, I mean, it is a form of a learning process, but it is not being taught. Now I am clear that in the case of Sir Reginald, it is the blind leading the blind. However, you bought these children.
Yeah,
So you know something there. And you should be able to guide them in a very specific way that is not so, you know, that resonated with me in that way. I'm sorry. Needed to.
No, excuse me for interrupting. And it's one of my biggest defects of character. I'm so sorry, Charles.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Yeah.
It's layers of, he bought those children, so he knows something.
Mm-hmm.
And it's blind leading the blind. And it's always one of those of like, there's plenty of times where, heck, we've been fostering now for like a month and a half. And there's times where I hear my parents and they come out of my mouth without me trying to, without me wanting them to. I told a kid, walk around and make sure your toes aren't touching the end of those shoes. And I couldn't have cared less if they did or not. My mom just possessed me a little bit. It is, but you know, sometimes it's this is children, growing children. And we literally, he's an alien. He's literally not human and he can't share in their experience. I think.
But we don't know he's an alien. And the children don't know he's an alien.
No, and so he presents as a white man buying people.
Right.
And so I need, like, let's just like name that in like all the ways in which I understand, you know, that form of human acquisition is still alive today through lots of different channels. And so, but he, you know, he knows what he's doing, showing up on Earth as an old white man, buying children. And assuming that money can buy a human, and that's problematic for lots of different reasons.
Yeah.
And so,
I wonder if the Umbrella Academy. I want to talk about the experience, the shared experience of not fitting in, and the shared experience of just having to figure stuff out within this. I always pick up the major vibe of the Umbrella Academy is really just a metaphor for the queer community in many ways. You have the self-medicator, you have the good gay in Luther, you have rumor. I mean, like, where would we be without that? But it's always this struggling to fit in how they are, where they are, but also into what they're supposed to be.
Well, I can parallel that to any oppressed community. I can parallel it to the Black community. I can parallel it to the Latinx community. I can parallel it to the Asian community. I can parallel it to any community that has seen oppression, because there is always the search for self.
Fair.
And the search for self, especially in with this overthought that I was brought here against my will. I have had to endure this without real cause because I don't see the end game. I simply know what I'm going through at the moment. I want to come back to the Klaus question though. Because well, you know, Klaus is probably, I like order and I like structure, and I don't do well with flighty and haphazard, and that's how I see Klaus. And so Klaus is probably my least favorite character. I know that everybody loves Klaus, and Klaus seems fun and all of that, and Klaus is a lot of things. However, in the statement that you just made, you said that Klaus, you know, he is dealing with something, and he could have lived in obscurity. He could have and oftentimes he does. Still, that's part of the reason that he does not want to speak on behalf of Ben, because it is his burden. It is his burden to have to deal with these dead voices. And that's a heavy thing, and it gives me to try to have empathy for him, except for the fact that I want him to have honed that better. Because if you do and maybe that's a personal thing for me. I come from a culture of working, and so if you do the work, you see the result. That has been my experience. I don't know of a space where, and this is personally, I don't know of a space where work does not garner a certain result. And granted, you don't necessarily have anyone to guide you in this. We will assume that no one has a gifting like Klaus does. You don't have anyone to guide you in this, but you do have to live with the gift. Mm-hmm. And in living with the gift, there are certain things you do to adapt. And the thing that you do to adapt cannot always be this. Mm-hmm. There must be some healthy adaptation methods that you are given or that you have. Now, the language of given. Somebody, one of his siblings, someone should have been able to say to him, okay, bam, 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 bam. And then I notice also that we see in those flashbacks when they are children, Klaus has a better handle on that as a child than he does as an adult. And so I'm thinking that his time at war would have been what really kind of pushed him far over the edge.
Trauma begets trauma.
Yes, it does.
So I like that, you named like they don't have this kind of, there's no one kind of holding your hand, right? There's no kind of person gifting you that way. And yet there kind of is, right? So when we think theology, we think of all the ways in which, God is at work in the world, right? So that's like what we're talking about. But at the very beginning of these episodes or of the series, we get a narrator. Mm-hmm. So who is that narrator? So my question is, who does the narrator's point of view represent, and what can we learn from it in regards not only to biblical interpretation, but like the interpretation of the ways in which we are called to show up in church? Like, I don't want to say, the faith lives of superheroes is really kind of never spoken about because they kind of function in the way of which we assume God has control over things, right? Mm-hmm. They do things that are beyond human limitations, which is something that we ascribe to a divine being so often. Mm-hmm. And yet, and not always, but just, most often, we're not talking about Superman's faith life. But we could. But we get this narrator, so we know there is someone at play. We know there is someone watching. We know that there is this vision for the timeline that is happening. Mm-hmm. What is it? The handler? Is it a god? What is that? But what does that? My question is like, what does that point of view offer access to us for or to?
I think that the narrator only gives oversight. Just oversight to everything that is happening. I don't see it as being from a specific point of view. I don't see it as being a specific individual who is within the story, certainly. Unless, and the only person who it could be within the story is, in my mind, is either Sir Reginald, the father, or number 5, who can time travel. Simply because the narrator jumps so many places, and we see, go ahead.
No, Diego's handler's daughter, I bet, can also jump in time travel too.
Well, only because she has access to the handler.
No, but if she's close to 5, can't she do it?
If she's close to 5, but then that puts in that caveat. If she's close to 5, sure. And we've not seen her before, season 2.
If you're close to Jesus, do you know God better?
That's I mean, that's a thing. That's a thing. But then
are we diving into incarnational theology based on Lila?
Kind of.
What's happening right now?
I think so. I think somehow we got there.
And forgive me for just like listening on this. I do agree with Charles though about the narrator. I took it as, well, one, it's the action box in the comic. They had to explain it, but 2, I took it as a Wes Anderson homage. There's always those weird moments of narration in Wes Anderson movies. And the opening of the series is hardcore ripping off his style. Not ripping off, paying tribute.
Sure.
and as the series gets weirder and weirder, but there's always that like, oh, the moon base looks like a model a little bit feeling. I thought it was world building personally, but
Well,
we
and
can also just call that a deistic approach, I guess, to storytelling.
sure, I mean, but as people that interpret scripture for a living, right? Like, in all of the different ways it manifests for community building, I don't think we can just write off a narrator's presence.
Well, I wouldn't say it's writing it off. Like, okay, so if I'm paralleling the comic and the narrator of the comic, we are the narrator of the comic. So that means that if I am looking at the Bible as a comic,
Mhm.
then we are the narrators of that particular book. I know growing up, if I'm reading the Bible, I have very specific imagery that happens in my mind around what is happening here. Certainly in Sunday school,
Sure.
they're talking about David and Goliath, and immediately I have a vision in my mind of, okay, they're talking about Calvary. I have a vision in my mind of what's happening. They're talking about all of these stories. I have a vision in my mind of what's happening, and I am able to put my own spin on it.
Sure.
I'm able to put my own, but all in all, it is oversight, and I'm able to jump back and forth in the timing of the book in order to see what needs to happen. So then if that's the case, then I become the narrator. And I think the narrator's voice is just the voice of us looking at this, but it is simply giving prologue and just oversight to what's happening. I could be wrong, though.
No,
we could all be wrong.
That's it. You can't.
We could all, yeah.
No.
But
This
going
is
in,
the Academy,
yeah.
dude.
This is the Academy. We get to be wrong. So, okay. So with narrator giving insight, as let's say that's the the focus and the action necessary for that character. What role then? Because I think here, in a way that I had not experienced in a really long time, music plays a really interesting part of the emotional intelligence of the character development. Like, we know how Vanya is feeling through her violin, right? We know how like there's dirges for Diego, or no, for Ben. There's Diego's got this more kind of like amped up lightning, like, and it and some of it has lyrics and some of it doesn't. But I think music as a character per se of this show gives, if we're looking at the show as kind of what we're building for church, gives churches permission to say, use your music better. Like, use it to enhance rather than to just ornament a worship service.
Yeah.
What?
We have to have a hymn right now. It's after the table, and that's when we sing a hymn. It may be one nobody knows, but we have to sing a hymn right now. I don't think you have that.
Hey, Charles, got any thoughts on that?
So back when I was teaching high school, I used to teach high school, well, in the city, but specifically there was a school I taught at in the South Bronx. And I used to do this yearly project. It was the end of the year project for everybody in my class. And it was the soundtrack to life. And the parameters were, give me 10 songs that are from different points in your life, and you need to write a paragraph for each song. And that's kind of how I think about, as a musician, I go through life and I got a soundtrack playing all the time. I have different things going on. Now, clearly, if we are talking about a television show or a specific story, and we want to have specific characters emulated, you're going to see specific themes that keep coming back, i.e. Vanya and her violin. There's always a thread of violin through when you see Vanya going through anything, there's violins present. But there are certain thematic things that happen for every character. I think of the music of worship, or the music of a worship experience. I think about this in the context of my life. I need to be able to carry this music that is happening in the sanctuary or happening wherever I am worshiping with me throughout life, so that it plays at certain moments, and so that I can pull it up again at certain moments. And so, sometimes that worship is a violin.
Sure.
The number of times I have pulled up Samuel Barber's Adagio for Strings in my life is just, at this point, it's one of the reoccurring themes. But, all of this, it's just a part of, for me, it's a part of the character development. The action was so piercing for me in this particular story that Vanya was really the only character that I paid close attention to the music for. Even once we got to season 2 and we had gone back in time and I knew majority of the songs that they kept referencing, I was like, okay, yeah, yes, I know this. Singing along. And then just pushed it on to the back. But I know that is a part of our lives. The music that consistently plays, that soundtrack that always plays in our minds. And I know that it's like that for people who are not musicians too. There are certain songs you hear when certain things happen. I joke with my friends, when we are all together and somebody says something crazy, we'll all kind of look at the camera and we'll turn back and continue. This is a part of our life. This is a part of our lives, and music is a thread that really connects everybody. And so the music that is found in this show, it's great. It's intense, but I think of it like a comic. I think of it like I would a Batman. I think of it like I would Superman, because there are recurring themes that keep coming back. And then there are other things that, might be new to the experience, but they're all a part of the soundtrack.
Absolutely. And it's something that I think it helps you really embody the experience in a new way, right?
Oh, of course.
So I've talked a little bit about this, but like I'm getting up every single morning and running on my treadmill, right? It's the first thing I do every single morning right now. And I watched all of Umbrella Academy, both season 1 and 2, while on my treadmill every single morning. Like that's just like how I got through it. And the last 2 episodes of season 2, when they're trying to get, when Diego and Ben are trying, and Allison are trying to get to Vanya, and they're in the FBI headquarters across from, and I had an extra mile on those 2 mornings because of the sound development that happened there. I just kept moving with him. I was like, oh my goodness, as Ben's like climbing, or Diego's climbing through the stairs, and I was just like, my body felt it because of the sound design, because of the way in which music led to that. And I thought about like, well, what about for those who are just reading it, right? Like they don't get that same experience. And so it's why music, it's why our, our full embodied and a full bodied worship experience does more for you than just scripture reading. Than a word, or than a sermon, regardless of its content or design.
But then I think about times when sound in general does that. So there was a morning that I was working out, and I've been doing virtual sessions with the guy that I train with, and we're on Zoom, and I'm working and everything, and I had John Lewis's funeral playing in the background, and my trainer said to me, he goes, I mean, you have this intensity today. I don't know what's going on. I said, I don't know. I knew that it was something that I was experiencing from the screen, but that was mostly talking. And so it was just that whole oral sensation, not oral, the oral sensation of just, hearing certain things and things that make you want to press a little further and a little harder. And certainly music does that. Certainly.
I'll think about in season 1 with Dancing in the Moonlight, just hearing the opening electric piano, and it's like, oh, okay, they're obviously still vaguely attracted to each other. Yes, completely agree.
Incest.
I've struggled so hard with that. Like I was so happy that Ray appeared. So happy.
I loved Ray.
Cause God, but yeah.
Okay. Oh hell. They're back. Okay. I apologize to your mother, Charles. I said a bad word. I
It's
froze up for a second. And,
It's all right.
Hi,
so,
Charles's mom.
Hey, mama, if you're watching, hey, Mona.
Hi, mom.
So let's talk about names for a second, because I noticed that everybody had a code name. And it was always the Seance, the Horror, the Kraken, which I loved, the Rumor, the Boy, and then it was Space Boy. So in the comics, I don't know if you know this, Spiff, but and if you do, forgive me. I
didn't read the comics, so you're good.
Number 1 and number 5 are twins. And that's just not really, I didn't pick up on any of that in the adaptation, and I may have missed it.
So they're saying that Luther and Five are twins?
Yeah.
That's a fascinating connection if that's
well,
true.
And then
if that is true for the life of the TV show.
The Boy. Well, no.
Okay, there are things though that happened with Luther that, okay. I mean, they don't tell you that at all in the TV show, but okay, I'm with it.
Yeah. But it's
going back to names.
When we talk about names, and I know you want to talk about the names they chose for themselves and how those play into symbology, which I love, and I don't want to take away from that. But with the code names, they just don't work well. Like Space Boy could also just be like Strong Man or Strong Guy, to borrow from Peter David's X Factor. The Kraken is clearly like a 10-year-old who wants to be a badass, naming himself. The Seance is the stupidest superhero name I've ever heard. And then they get to choose their own biological names. And what does it mean to have identity shifts and to code switch, so to speak, or to find yourself and to name yourself? Please talk about name meanings. We were talking about this before we started recording, and I love this.
So, okay. So let's also do the father, because the father has a name too. He's the monocle.
Oh.
And so, yeah. So you got to talk about that. But then, okay, so Space Boy, all of their names, I can see how they connect with the character presented both in the comic and in the show. Father is the monocle. Then he is Sir Reginald Hargreaves. I'm gonna go to meanings in a minute. But
also, who gave him that Sir title besides himself?
Well, probably himself. Like he presents as British on the show. However, we have not seen that connection, and we certainly didn't see it in season 2. Because that would have been the time in my mind that he would have been.
Some weird image of him and the Queen getting knighted.
Yeah, that. Like, Space Boy. Space Boy is Luther. He spent significant. Space Boy. The Kraken. The only thing I can think about concerning that is the Kraken destroys every ship it comes in contact with. And so the thought around Diego is that he is just destructive. He's going to destroy, and he is the primary assassin of the group, like there's in knives and such. And so, okay, it's going to be that.
And you release the Kraken.
Yes, when you release the Kraken, that's it.
Okay,
it's over. Pirates of the Caribbean. Yay. Okay. The Rumor, very appropriate. I heard a rumor that when you get into the meaning of Allison. I need to go ahead and say that one now. So
I think you should start with, so we can go back and say Reginald is Reginald, as you shared, means king, right? And so
king or ruler.
King or ruler. So he's developing this community in which he has already self-appointed himself through namesake king and ruler. Who else? He gave himself a Sir title, which apparently will represent nobility, but we'll throw that on the side burner. But then, so get us to Allison.
Okay. So Reginald is king and ruler. Space Boy, Luther. Luther means army of the people, which is very interesting when you look at how soft Luther presents concerning his emotions, but you look at his build and you look at what he is built to do and what he ends up doing all the time. He is the main force of strength that is there. He is the one that is going to come fighting and swinging. So he's the army of the people. The Kraken, Diego. Diego means may God protect. which is very interesting to me, given like he's this knife wielding, just but may God protect.
Well, and he
It
gets
holds the
more than anyone else. He's the one who goes out there and he gets beaten. He gets caught. He gets beat up. He gets.
But that's because of his personality. He is always rushing into a fight.
He holds the tension of destruction and protection really well. Because I think that there's a protector, his relationship with the mom. Yeah. There's a, he's not out to destroy her and yet destroys her to protect her.
Right.
So he holds that tension. I like that name a lot because I think that he holds that tension well.
Allison. Allison is the rumor. The name Allison means noble or truth. Yet her power lies. That is so rich to me because her
excuse me, her power is making the truth though, because she changes reality around it.
But that's the thing. Her power is her making the truth, not in her stating the truth. Everything she states becomes truth.
Yes.
And it's also well, yeah.
If you make something true, can you make something untrue true?
I think we're in a post-truth world right now.
I will agree.
I do too. Listen. I'm just here to deconstruct things.
Well, I interjected and I apologize, especially.
No, quite all right. But like, okay, so season 2, I heard a rumor that you killed your brother. It becomes true because everything that she says must become truth. When stated with the caveat, I heard a rumor, but the caveat of I heard a rumor and gives itself to something that would be considered generally an untruth. So that, I mean, that to me, there's richness there. The seance. I understand the seance's name. So the seance is Klaus. He speaks to the dead. Seance. I hate the name, the seance, but hey, this is interesting. Klaus's name means the victory of the people. I thought about that against him becoming a cult leader or should we call it a cult? It's a cult, but a cult leader in season 2. He tried to say it wasn't a cult. That's what
all Destiny's Children.
He quoted waterfalls.
I mean, for those of you that weren't in worship with Park Avenue 2 weeks ago, it was just beautiful because I preached on TLC's Waterfalls. We sang it, which was beautiful.
We sang Waterfalls.
But don't get me wrong, there were many a times in which I just like spoke it aloud into the truth that kind of Klaus does as well.
But victory of the people, and this is so interesting, and it makes me think about a lot of things that I heard in church growing up. Klaus's power is that he speaks to the dead. And as Christians, we often talk about this victory in death. Not just that we have victory in life, but in death and in the presence of God, there is a victory. And so when I think about the victory of the people, I think about Klaus communicating with those who are on the other side, who are seeing victory that we have not. And that is very much, it can be considered morbid, but then it is also considered in certain circles of Christianity very victorious as well. So,
well, and part of his gift isn't just that he speaks to them, but that he hears them and sees them, right? Like, because as Christians, I would say we also speak to the dead.
Oh yes.
We just aren't always equipped to listen well, right? With those with ears to hear, right? There's Klaus. That's part of Klaus's power.
But then there is also I forget what it is called. We see it in season 2. Ben, I don't know what that's called. I feel bad in this moment. Ben goes into possesses. There's possession that happens there too. So that's another layer. The boy, which I hate that name, but the boy is number 5. Number 5 is considered the number of God's grace.
which is the only one that doesn't actually have a
name.
West or a different name. They all have numbers who were given to them, which we can. I mean, that's an entirely other conversation about buying children and then giving them numbers.
Well, he's the most alone too. He doesn't quote need a name because he's been by himself. He does name his mannequin.
That's true.
But everyone he functions with, it's the agency, it's the this, it's the that. There's not a lot of first names with anybody. Hazel and Chopper, very true. Not their first names.
That's true.
What they're called.
That's true. The horror, Ben, which that's interesting for me. The horror, simply because like when he is, I would have called him the Kraken.
Yeah.
Simply because when he is operating like in that monstrous portion of his gift, we can't see all the tentacles and everything, but these tentacles reach out from his chest and are grabbing people and throwing them around and whatnot. And so but he is the horror. And Ben's name is interesting because Ben is dead, yet Ben or Benjamin would mean child of good fortune or good speaker. Or blessed also, but he is dead. Child of good fortune, that is dead. And then good speaker, the only way that Ben can communicate is through the crazy Klaus. That is, and then that brings us to the white violin, Vanya. Vanya, so there's something to be said here. Vanya is a boy's name, and it speaks to the dual nature that we see happening in this character too. In that Vanya presents as a lesbian, but Vanya is a boy's name that means God is gracious. Yet God is gracious, yet Vanya's purpose seems to be, especially according to Diego, to always be the bomb. She is always the thing that causes or the main point of destruction emanates from her.
Well, and that's interesting to come from Diego, whose name literally sits with destruction.
But then notice Diego was the main one initially talking about, I've got to get to Vanya. I've got to kill Vanya. So may God protect. It's interesting. Just the way it has all worked out. So, or the way it is, of course, designed to work out. I'm looking forward to seeing what happens next.
I am too. I have a couple of questions, but we didn't actually get to, and we're not going to get to all of them. That's okay. But I think in naming, with these names, is there something freeing about labels, about being able to label yourself, about about what happens when other people label you? I'm thinking specifically of when in season 1, when we really see Klaus self-medicating. He names himself as kind of a garbage heap, like he names himself in a way that does not value his own humanity, but we've said here's a junkie, right? And yet he in that space is allowed to be free, right? Like he doesn't conform to normal social rules of, let's say, gender or expression or anything like that. Ben, at the same time, as someone we have labeled dead, yet is very much alive and active still in our world, there's a freedom there, and so I guess when we claim labels within our own faith communities, what are their limitations and what are the ways in which they allow us to be expansive?
I feel that there are always labels when other people, there are always limitations when other people label you. But when you are able to name yourself and when you are able to call yourself what you see, or what we would say God sees when God sees you, that then becomes the point of empowerment. And in terms of Klaus calls himself, trash and all of that, fine. But he is naming his truth from which he can grow so that in season 2, he becomes a cult leader, because that's what we're all aspiring to. But
well, and he stops, he becomes sober. Like he hones his gifts through his own form of self-care, which I think is also form of self-care. Which I think is really, that's what happens when we only label something as someone as something, is that we don't allow the other side of that nature to blossom and to help that person grow.
Well, we don't allow for evolution. We don't allow for people to evolve and to change and to grow.
There are certain people that take it out of history. So, you know.
I mean, don't get me wrong. There are certain people in my life who I kind of feel like, okay, you have been this way, you're gonna be this way. That's it. But you may surprise me. You may surprise me, especially if you find out that you are named something different than what others have called you. And so when you stand in your truth and when you stand in the power of who you really are, even if I don't see who you really are in the moment, I cannot take that truth from you, nor can I stop you from functioning in that truth. And there's a power there.
Arthur, yes. You have your thinking face on.
So forgive me, I'm looking at my notes, and I actually took notes this time. I'm not going to show them to you because I'm embarrassed, and I'm terrified that somebody's going to like pause the video and be like, "What is that?"
Zoom in.
Yeah, enhance. But so I wonder with this, so superheroes traditionally save the world. That's what superheroes do, and supervillains try to destroy it. Right? So we literally end season 1 with the destruction of the world. And part of season 2 is that there's an alternate timeline. They're going to rebuild 2019 or make, you know, here's a way to get back or anything else. But ultimately, the world's destroyed. Everyone they know and love is dead. And, you know, because really, I don't want to get into quantum physics here, or maybe I do, but like an alternate dimension, where I had to come from an alternate dimension, I wouldn't know you. I would know someone like you. You would know someone like me, but it's not, you know, hence showing up at the Sparrow Academy, not the Umbrella Academy. What does it mean? And I think this touches on the whole like victory and death thing. What does it mean to operate having already considered or understand, I guess this is eschatologically, that the world is over? Whatever new age is coming is coming. How do we as Easter people, between the death of Jesus and the culmination of all things through Jesus, how are we to function? Which one of the Umbrella Academy or any of the Umbrella Academy living eschatologically? See, this is why I don't ask questions towards the end of the episode, because I'm going off on tears.
No, it's good. I don't know, Charles, you want to take a stab at it?
I'm looking at my list of characters here.
I mean, yeah, go ahead.
Well, okay, if I'm thinking about living in that manner, I'm thinking about living with a hope.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see it.
Thank you.
I see that there is always someone trying to do the work of salvation. I see that they're, you know, as a group, they want to be the saviors, with the exception of, you know, Sir Reginald. But I don't see that anybody is. Yeah.
So is salvation possible without hope?
Well, okay. So let me turn that around a little bit. I would say 5.
I was going to say 5. Yeah.
Though warped, it is a hope of sorts.
The reason he goes back, like,
yeah.
if you see end times and your thought is to sit down and die, right? Which is not his, but like that would denote lack of hope. But because he goes back and does try and amend and work with the handler and, you know, people that he probably shouldn't have and all those things, I would say that there's hope in 5.
Yeah. I would also say, so when we see 5 for the first time in season 1, he is coming from having been trapped at the end of time for a number of years. I cannot say that I would have made my way back. I would have got there. Oh, I jumped a little too far. Okay. Well, what now? Mm-hmm. I'd have probably, you know, sat down. Just.
Same.
Yeah.
Well, maybe not, but
I mean,
but who knows?
Yeah. And so, but clearly there was something in him that kept him trying to jump. He kept trying to, jump to where he needed to be or where he felt he needed to be. And so I'm going to give that to him.
I love it. Well, we are arriving at our hour. And so, first of all, hey, Travis, where is our song?
Yeah, Travis.
Travis.
Every week we ask our first guest, Travis Smith McKee, where our final question song is, because he said he would do it.
He promised us a song. But we are in our final question, the one question of the 2-on-1 interview that is given to you ahead of time.
No matter what timeline we are in, we ask this question at the end of.
Exactly. So Charles, and you'll get to answer first. What biblical character, story, person, book, theme are you most reminded of in Umbrella Academy's characters or, theme or whatever?
So I've tried to think about this. It has not worked well. But if I have to choose, I'm going to say, so because of this whole notion of the apocalypse that keeps recurring, it keeps kind of pointing me to Revelations. I hate that, but it just, I hate that. And I feel
we gotta destroy that empire.
Hey. I feel like that's, though I feel that is the answer for me, I also feel like that's kind of an easy answer. And so I want to continue to think about this. I've given it a lot of thought, but I keep coming back to Revelations. I keep coming back to just, okay, everything's about to end. Come on, let's.
Which allows for something new, right?
Which allows for something new, but yeah. In what context concerning the show? Is that, so that is my answer right now. I want to say something else. But yeah.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
Arthur, you want to go?
I'm going to go for a deep cut and play into some midrash and say it's the Mighty Men, good old King David's personal army. As the midrash goes, they are descendants of the Nephilim. They were big, enormous people who were kind of superhuman, and that's why David was so successful. And what does that mean in that kind of undercurrent? I'm thinking a lot about superhuman versus human. We talked, was it last week? At one point, the question was raised, at what point would, in a world with superhumans, would we draw a line between you are human versus superhuman? Like, what would the Olympics look like? What kind of testing would have to happen to ensure your superpower isn't super speed and you were running against Usain Bolt? And you still might lose because that man is insane. But we just kind of like, the Mighty Men thread runs through, the Nephilim thread runs through a lot of the Hebrew Bible. And we don't necessarily pull on it because it's super crazy. I don't know. That's just on my mind today from this conversation.
I like it. So I want more specific. I think Ben is not specific, but more like Ben is kind of the unnamed people in the stories that we know were present but aren't actually named. Because he is in the background of everything that Klaus does per se, and yet for those that don't know that he is there or don't know Klaus's gifts, if someone were to have an experience with Klaus and write it down, then would not be necessarily part of their understanding of that experience, and yet is fully present.
So Ben is kind of the women disciples at the Last Supper.
The women, the queer, all of it. I have Allison as the woman at the tomb, because I have this vision of her going to the men that come up to her and being like, I heard a rumor Jesus is back, go spread it, and they go, and which is why they get all the credit and it's not necessarily back to her. So I have this vision of her as one of the Marys, and then I have Reginald is specifically for me God, but in Job is Job's God that is playful with the devil for the sake of his people. and so that for me, I've always wrestled with the God of Job. And I don't love Job as a book. I know it brings hope to a lot of people for what, but so that vision
The
of
last chapter. I'm sorry.
Here's children, just like your old ones.
Exactly. Real problematic. But so for me, that's
the same thing. That's fine.
But it's like at the very beginning, why are God and Satan so chummy? For the sake of Job. And so this kind
and the response to Job is, oh, okay, you want to try doing this? Yeah,
it's trial by error, which is what we're expecting of these Hargreaves kids. And so so for me, that sat in that kind of Jobian text. So
love it.
That's what we got. Well, friend, thank you so much for joining us.
It's an honor and privilege to get to talk with you today, and thank you for joining us for 2-on-1. Charles Anthony Bryant is a working musician in the city of New York.
Listen, you got to say it.
A theological centerpiece in so many conversations and ways, and we thank you 1,000 times. We are going to ask you right now, if you haven't liked us on Facebook, and this is for everybody, not just you, Charles, but if you haven't liked us on Facebook, please do so. You can share this or any of the other variety of live conversations Spiff and I have had. You can send us an email at 2on1project@gmail.com. Follow us on Twitter. I think we have an Instagram. I just don't know how Instagram works, and that's a running gag.
We have Instagram. We have stories and games that I make every week.
She does a wonderful job. Spiff, who's coming up the next couple weeks?
We have a two-week back-to-back kind of bookending the Emmys. Next week we have Reverend Aaron Wathen coming for Schitt's Creek Part 1. And then after the Emmys, we have Reverend Danny Golden for Schitt's Creek Part 2. And then we will end September with Reverend Catherine Wright with the Gilmore Girls.
Excellent. You and I should put together an episode list for Schitt's Creek for our viewers, I think.
Absolutely.
5 and 5 is what I would do.
Charles has a thought.
I have a request.
Yeah.
Please.
Should you ever do Lovecraft Country, please have me back.
Charles.
Charles, would you like to come back and do Lovecraft Country with us?
I would love to come back and do Lovecraft Country.
So
thank you.
Stay tuned and follow us on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook to find out when Charles is coming back to do Lovecraft Country, because that's absolutely how this works. If you're a clergy and you would like to talk to us about some pop culture thing that you just love or don't love, but have strong opinions about and can see theological intersections, get in touch with us, of course, in a variety of ways. Thank you very much, Charles. Thank you, Spiff. I'm going to stop the recording and the live on Facebook, and that's done. And now the recording.